Hello! Well, it's been quite a while since I posted anything to this channel. So this is just going to be kind of an informal, like podcast type video where I'm just going to talk about some things and I'm not going to do like any graphics or heavy editing or anything like that on here, but I wanted to talk about the open carry stuff. That's been spread around for many years now. And I want to talk about there's been a lot of misinformation on it, first of all. So I want to, first of all, explain some of the misinformation, what was actually going on during those events, and then I want to talk about why I disowned that group like 9 years ago, and then talk about what has changed in my views on gun control and why, and then talk about maybe like what kind of gun control I would implement given if I were dictator of the United States or something like that. So. And then a lot of people are going to ask, well, David, why haven't you addressed this earlier? Because my views on this have changed many, many years ago. And what I've been trying to avoid up to this point is the Streisand Effect, right? That, for those that aren't familiar with that, it's where like you're actually going to draw more attention to a topic by trying to hide it or, whatever than you would just by ignoring it. And so that's kind of the approach I've taken for the last decade or so, is just trying to ignore this. Likewise, a lot of people will ask me, well, if you don't believe in that kind of stuff anymore, why do you still have the videos up? Well, because if I know exactly what would happen, like I removed some of those videos from my Facebook account many years ago, and what happens is those videos now wind up being, somebody had copied them and they post them all around on the internet, and then they instead of people seeing the full video in its entirety and all the things that I said or did, they only see little clips, and then people make up their own story about what was going on. And then what they'll say is, oh, David removed those videos because he's trying to hide them, but here's the real truth, right? And so that's why I've left the Awesome Air Guns videos up, because at least that way when people see the videos, they see the whole thing, and they're not seeing clips, and they're not seeing made-up stories to go along with them. So that's the reason for that. So the first thing I want to do is let's talk about my political beliefs. I'm not going to go into great details on all the things that I believe, but what I am going to say is that whatever it is you think I believe, you're probably wrong. Whether you think I'm on the far right or the far left, you're probably wrong. I'm actually... it's funny because, because I've been seen with firearms, a lot of people assume that I'm on the far right and that I'm a MAGA Republican, Donald Trump supporting type of guy or whatever. And I want to distance myself from that as much as absolutely possible. Having said that, I have certainly voted for Republicans in the past because I've always been a bit of a swing voter. I'm not a one-issue voter. I try to look at a candidate and decide, like, do I like this guy? Do I not like this guy? Or whatever. And I try not to look at issues as black and white. I've always tried to look at issues as shades of gray and understand that issues are more complex than what a lot of people think that they are. And so I'm a swing voter, and likewise, a lot of people have seen that I drive an electric car, or they've seen me wearing a mask back during the pandemic, and so they think I must be an ultra liberal. Right? And so I get it from both sides. People, they see one aspect of me and they try to form a picture that's all encompassing. Like if he does one liberal thing, he must be an extreme far left liberal. And if he does one conservative thing, he must be a far right conservative. And neither of those is true. And so I just wanted to dispel that myth, first of all. But, okay, so what I'm going to do now is I want to tell you exactly what was going on in those Open Carry Texas events, dispel a lot of the misinformation, and then after that I'm going to tell you why I disowned that group. So first of all, there's videos of me, or still shots of me, walking around with a firearm on my back. Like it's actually not an AR-15, despite what a lot of people say. It's actually just a 22 caliber long rifle. Gun that's dressed up to look, like an assault rifle or whatever, but it's just a Ruger 22 long rifle. It's not what people think it is. But that aside, there's a video where I'm actually making fun. I'm really not making fun. I said I'm doing this because it pisses off Shannon Watts. And one of the pieces of misinformation that goes around a lot is people will say, well, here David is mocking some poor woman who lost her child at the Sandy Hook shooting, which is not true. Shannon Watts, as far as I know, never lost any child in any school shooting. She was the, at the time, I don't know what she's doing now, but 10 years ago, she was the leader of an organization called Moms Demand Action Against Gun Rights in America, or something like that. Anyway, that's who that was, and they had recently done something that was, well, I'm not going to get into the details of that, but they had done some shady stuff, actually. And because, yes, anti-gun people do shady stuff just like pro-gun people do. Big surprise. And so anyway, so that was one piece of misinformation. The other thing is a lot of people don't understand is these were organized events. There were often dozens, if not hundreds of people involved in these events. They were pre-planned. We notified the police, any businesses that we were going to be going into. We got permission beforehand. There were news crews around, and everywhere we were doing these events, there were police following us around, and it was all over the news back then. This was to anybody who lived in this, in Texas. It was happening in Dallas, Houston, Austin, San Antonio, everywhere. So, everybody knew what was going on. So when people look back at these videos from 10 years ago, they often make up their own story of what was going on. Like, oh, I'm just some crazy terrorist guy that walks around with an AR-15 on my back and making fun of poor ladies who lost their child at Sandy Hook or whatever. And so none of that narrative is true. So, so that being said, I just wanted to set the record straight on what was going on back then. Now, let's talk about why I'm not associated with that group anymore. So, the main thing that the main reason I was part of the group is because I agreed with the philosophy of getting open carry of handguns legalized in Texas, because most other states already had it. And whether you agree or don't agree with that philosophy, that was the reason I was involved in the group. Right, but after that got passed, the group seemed to lose any focus on the open carry thing, and then they became focused on their new goal was eliminating all gun legislation, like any gun laws. Their idea was that any gun law at all is a violation of the Constitution, and they wanted to get rid of them all. And the other problem was the group, like I said, it kind of shrank. It contracted after the passage of open carry because most of the normal people just kind of like, okay, well, we got that passed. We don't need to be part of this group anymore. The people that remained in the group were the most extreme views. And almost all of these people believed in crazy conspiracy theories. Now, before I go too much into that, I just want to mention, I have no idea who's involved in Open Carry Texas today, or if the group is even still around. I haven't even looked into it. So, what I'm saying now may or may not apply to the current organization. I'm just telling you what was happening back then, 10 years ago, right? So almost everybody that was left in the group believed in chemtrails and vaccine conspiracies, water fluoridation conspiracies, 9/11 conspiracies, and when I tried to explain to these people some, logic dispelling some of their conspiracies, let's just say they didn't go over very well. They didn't like hearing logic and facts and evidence and stuff like that. And so I wasn't particularly popular in the group just because of that already, the fact that I wouldn't give in to the various conspiracies. But then, like I said, after the group contracted down to the kind of the core extremists, and they started wanting to eliminate all gun laws, I was going to make a point in one of our meetings. I kind of said, hey, look, you can't get rid of all gun laws. Let me show you why. And I said, imagine, for example, raise your hand if you think that there should be a law prohibiting kindergartners from carrying fully loaded Uzis to class. And, I was expecting all the people to raise their hands so that I could make a point about that. And would you believe that not a single person would raise their hand and say that they agree that it should be illegal for kindergartners to carry Uzis to class? I was shocked, to say the least. And at that point, I kind of had an epiphany. I'm like, why am I associating with these people? And so I just kind of told everybody, I said, look, guys, good luck, but I can't can't support this movement anymore. And as I was leaving, I was called a liberal extremist. So anyway, that was kind of my end of my association with Open Carry Texas. And like I said, I don't even know who's involved in the organization today or if it's even still around. But that was what happened back then, and I kind of disowned it right then. So let's talk about some other things. So some of the things that have changed in the last 10 years. First of all, although this might surprise a lot of people, the number of homicides in the U.S. has been falling since the 90s. There's occasional little spikes here and there, but if you look at a chart showing the overall homicide rate in the U.S., you'll see a decline over the last several decades. And at the time that these videos were made, it was actually pretty low. It was actually surprisingly low. And mass shootings were pretty rare, actually, especially in Texas. I mean, we hadn't had a mass shooting in Texas in quite a while. And but over the last 10 years, mass shootings have not only skyrocketed, but they've also gone from using things like handguns and shotguns to AR-15s. That's like now the weapon of choice for mass shooters. And so anyway, that's had me thinking, obviously, and I'm like, well, okay. Even though gun-related crime in general is down, it's kind of like, how should we put it? Let me give you some examples of where this can create some misrepresentation. So I want to talk a little bit about news reporting and misrepresentation that might occur. I'm going to give you an example. If a Jeep were to catch on fire on the side of the freeway, what do you think would happen? Well, the fire department would come out, put out the fire. A tow truck would come, pick up the Jeep, take it off. Someone would file a insurance claim, and that'd be the end of it. But if a Tesla catches fire on the side of the freeway, then it's like there's news helicopters everywhere, and there's news reporting everywhere. Oh, look at this Tesla on the side of the road. It's on fire, and blah, 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 blah. And it can lead people to this idea that Teslas catch on fire a lot when they don't, actually. And likewise, if someone dies in a car crash, unless they're famous or something like that, you're probably not going to hear anything about it. But if an airplane crashes, then it's front page news for 2 weeks because a lot of people died in the airplane crash. And so again, this kind of can lead people to think, oh, well, airplanes must be dangerous. That's why a lot of people have a fear of flying. And when in reality, you're far more likely to die in an automobile accident. And so I try not to have a knee-jerk reaction to a mass shooting because even though, a bunch of people died, I also realize that it's not necessarily representative of, gun-related homicides in general. And I also understand that the homicide rate is still much lower despite the mass shootings than it was 20, 30 years ago or even 10 years ago when I made those open carry videos. But it seems mass shootings are on the rise, and that is troubling. So, of course, I always had the philosophy of, and don't cringe when I say it, the good guy with the gun. And, because that was my thinking, hey, I'm the guy with the gun, and I'm the good guy, so I'm going to take care of if there's a mass shooter or something like that. But, again, times have changed, and in the past, first of all, it appeared that most mass shooters, and I don't think this is a coincidence, they picked, the gun-free zones to go do their shooting because they knew there would be no resistance. But lately, I've seen more and more of these taking place in places that are not gun-free zones. And so, in fact, we had one just like a week ago here in the Dallas area, and it was at a mall, and I'm pretty sure it was not a gun-free zone. So I'm scratching my head like going, where were all the armed people? Because, there were probably a dozen people in that mall that were carrying firearms, so why did nobody fight back? And so I had to do a lot of, soul searching on this because it's taken me a little bit by surprise. And don't get me wrong, we have seen evidence where sometimes good guys with a gun do, in fact, stop these mass shootings. I know of at least 2 incidents, but they seem to be rare. Like very rarely does that seem to work. And I think part of the problem is, having spent some more time thinking about this, the modern mass shooter is carrying a rifle and wearing body armor. And so, as someone who's carrying a handgun, like if there's some crazy guy in the mall and he pulls out a rifle and starts shooting, and even if I'm armed, I'm gonna have to close the distance with him a lot. Realistically speaking, I'm not going to be able to shoot anyone more than 20 feet away, especially if we're talking about a moving target. And then if that guy is wearing body armor, then that's going to reduce the area, like my target, to an even smaller area, because I would have to aim for vulnerable spots. And, and if he's got a long range weapon with him with a magazine with 30 rounds in it, I've got no chance against that. So so I think I would probably see that, and I'd probably run just like everyone else and look for cover. And I think I would probably only wind up using my firearm if I were cornered and had absolutely no way out. And so yeah, this has made me also rethink a little bit about where our legislation should lie. All right, so having said that, before we can get any legislation passed, I think, and before I even tell you what I think would be the ideal gun legislation, I want to tell you why I think we don't get anywhere with gun legislation. And I'm going to put some of the blame on the liberals. And I know that's going to surprise a lot of people because they're the ones obviously pushing for more gun control. But, and don't get me wrong, the conservatives have a lot of the blame. I'm not trying to absolve them of any blame, but I want to talk about, especially having been, at least in terms of gun rights, on the far right, for decades, I can tell you that one of the problems with I can tell you two problems when negotiating with the far left on the ideas of gun control. One problem is knowledge. Let me give you an example. This is an example for liberals out there. You know how annoying it is when some conservative politician gets up on his soapbox and he starts giving a speech about some legislation he wants to pass, and he's talking about a topic of which he knows nothing about. For example, he could be talking about climate change or the theory of evolution or women's reproductive rights or these kind of things. And you know how annoying it is because you're sitting there and you're like, how can I take this guy seriously? Because clearly he doesn't understand the science behind any of these things, right? Well, as annoying as that is, I can flip that around and say it is equally annoying when a liberal politician gets up on his soapbox and he starts talking about guns and every other thing out of his mouth is wrong because he doesn't understand how guns work, or even what our current laws are, or the proper terminology for things, and so it's hard to take anything else that they say seriously after that. And so my recommendation would be, if you want to have somebody represent your ideas on gun policies, find somebody who actually understands how guns work if you want them to be taken seriously by both sides. So that's thing number one. Okay, so thing number two is you need to rein in some of the most extreme views in your party. So despite what a lot of these representatives will say, they'll get up on their little soapbox and they'll say, now I believe in the Second Amendment and blah, 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 and I believe in gun rights and gun ownership and all this kind of stuff. But when they're not in public, they're sitting there talking to people about how they want to ban all guns. And they even want to ban BB guns and airsoft guns and anything that looks like a gun. And, it's not my imagination. I've actually experienced some of this thing firsthand, where you'll have someone, say in public one thing, and then, in private they're talking about banning all guns. And they're saying, yeah, if we can just ban the assault weapons, then that's a stepping stone. And then next we'll ban the shotguns, and next the handguns, and then next we'll get to BB guns, and whatever, until it's all gone. And so that's their goal. And because the far right knows that that's the goal of the far left, they will not give an inch. If you want to make any progress, then you need to rein in these people who have extreme goals and make more moderate goals and things that both sides maybe could actually agree on. And so I want to give you an example of exactly what I'm talking about. So I want to show you this. So this is it's an air gun, actually. and it actually shoots. Well, you can shoot rubber balls, 50 caliber rubber balls, or riot balls. I have this one loaded with riot balls, so those are made of PVC with a metal ball interior, and they're considered to be non-lethal, or I guess the actual term is less lethal, right? Because I guess it's possible you could kill somebody with something like this, but it's extremely unlikely. So this one here, it's based on paintball gun technology, but it actually, in fact, it had a big warning sticker I had to pull off that said, do not use paintballs because the velocity is too high and it'll crush the balls in the barrel. Right, so you don't want your paintballs crushed inside there. But anyway, this is marketed as a self-defense weapon, and I actually carry this around with me, especially in places that other weapons are not allowed. And this would be probably one of the closest things I can imagine to the Star Trek phaser, right? Where you have the stun setting and you can, stun somebody, you can deter somebody, right? You can shoot them with one of these and it's going to hurt a lot. And this could probably break small bones, like if you were to, get shot in the hand or in the teeth or, places like that. But generally, it's not going to penetrate skin. So it's going to leave a big contusion. It's going to, like I said, it's going to hurt like heck. And I doubt anybody's going to want to stay around for a second shot unless they're just pumped up on drugs. If they are pumped up on drugs, then they're probably not going to care about getting shot with a real gun either. I know a lot of people talk about stopping power, which I think is mostly a myth. I don't think anything short of a 12-gauge shotgun has any stopping power to it. So, especially talking about handguns, right? So I think we need to be passing laws that actually, how should we put it, not deter people from buying these, but encourage people to buy these instead of a firearm or something similar to this. In fact, I would not be opposed. I'm very much for creating a new classification of firearms that use actual like shells with gunpowder, but would have non-lethal projectiles that it would shoot, and make the gun designed so that it cannot take lethal projectiles, right? So it could only be used for that one thing. And I think we should be encouraging more citizens to buy things like that instead of guns, especially people who don't understand how to use guns and are not, right? So having said that, the problem is, so I'll give you a great example. Recently, I went to New Jersey, and I knew that New Jersey was one of the like 4 or 5 states that do not honor my Texas handgun permit that I have. Like the other 40 some odd states honor it, but that's one of the states that don't. So usually what I'll do in that case is I'll take something like this with me because it's not classified as a firearm on the federal level. But I looked it up the day before I left in New Jersey and saw that, oh, guess what? New Jersey bans these. They're considered firearms. Like basically, if I got caught with that in New Jersey, I'd wind up in prison. And so that's an example of just taking it too far. Like I said, we should literally be encouraging people to buy that kind of thing, and pepper spray and tasers and other non-lethal self-defense tools. And hopefully, if more people had those, they wouldn't necessarily feel the need to buy a firearm. But because the way the laws are written, right? So if you lived in New Jersey, for example, they can't deny you to be able to purchase a firearm because of the Second Amendment. But I guarantee you, if we didn't have the Second Amendment, they would forbid it, right? Because that, and again, I mean, you can tell because if they're forbidding stuff like this, then they're obviously wanting to ban everything. So that's an example of just taking things too far, right? I mean, we need to take a stick and carrot approach, right? And so that's what I'm gonna do next. I want to talk about like what I think like the ultimate. Like if you were to make me dictator of the United States and I could just pass any laws I wanted and I didn't have to pass them through Congress or anything like that, this is what I would see as the perfect gun laws for our country. And I know I'm going to get disagreement from this on both sides, but just so we're clear and so I don't have to argue about it in the future about what I do or don't believe, I'm just going to lay it out. First of all, so I do think the Second Amendment guarantees us to be able to buy firearms, but I think if you want to buy a firearm without any kind of permit, then I think you should be limited to a single shot, like rifle or pistol or whatever. And then what we're talking about is like a break barrel. Like you break the barrel open, you put the bullet in, you clamp it back, you fire the one shot, and now you got to reload it with a new bullet. So if you just wanted to walk into a store and you had no kind of permit or anything like that, you could buy one of those. And there's plenty of those available, by the way. So it's not like some imaginary thing. And if you think about it, The reload time on that is much less than the reload time would have been back when the Second Amendment was written and they had to use like, ball and powder and cram it all down in there and wax it and all that kind of stuff. So so that's still probably even beyond what the original founders probably had in mind for firearms. That being said, if someone wants a semi-automatic or revolver, then I think that they need to have a permit. And I'm not being hypocritical about this because I've had I went through the process to get my permit back in the 90s, and I've had to retake the class like 3 or 4 times, I've forgotten, but I've had to redo it several times, get recertified. And I like that idea because, first of all, it makes sure that a person is properly trained on how to use a firearm safely and properly. It ensures that they understand what all the different laws are on the book, so they actually know what they can and cannot do. It also requires getting fingerprinted. That way they can check to see, hey, do you match up with any previous crimes or future crimes. And then, they have background checks and all that kind of stuff. And I think that if people want to go through that process, then they would be allowed to buy a semi-automatic or revolver firearm of some kind. And that would solve so many problems because, everything from having people better trained and whatnot, but also like it would close the gun show loophole, right? Because if you have to have a permit, then all that, like when you go into a gun show, you would have to show your permit even to buy a firearm from like a private dealer or something like that, or an individual, right? So that would solve a lot of problems with that sort of thing. And I don't think the kind of person who's likely to be a mass shooter or whatever is going to go through the process of getting the permit. All we have to do is look at the last 30 years or 40 years of history of states that have had permitting systems, and you'll find the crime rates for the people who have the permits are extremely low. In fact, this is another example of some misinformation, but there's a website out there, or used to be out there, where they try to keep track of all of the people who killed somebody who had a permit. And the number, like when you actually start looking through the PDF, is extremely deceiving because it turns out I want to say over half the number is actually suicides, right? So, I don't consider suicide a homicide. Maybe some people do, but I don't. And there's any number of ways you could kill yourself if you wanted to. It's not like you need a gun for that, right? So a recap. I think yes, single shot firearms would be allowed for anyone age 18 or older. Semi-autos and revolvers, you need a permit for it. And then here's the real kicker. And I've been putting a lot of thought into this. And I think as civilians, our guns should not have magazines. I think that 10 to 12 shots should be fine for any civilian firearm, and you would want to load those rounds in one at a time. So like if you had manufacturers would obviously have to modify their guns. So like if you had like a Glock or something, rather than sticking a magazine into the grip, you would have to load the bullets into the grip one at a time and then close like a little trap door or something like that. And then you would be good for your 10 to 12 shots. And then when you run out, you're going to have to reload them again manually. And that would go a long way to stopping mass shootings, because even if someone did go through the permitting process and decided later they wanted to go do a mass shooting, they're going to be limited to whatever the ammo is in their gun, and they're not going to be able to quickly swap it out with a reloaded magazine. And, I know a lot of people in the gun crowd are going to go bonkers for me saying something like that, but I've spent a lot of time about it. I just really can't think of any civilian need for magazines and guns. So I think and then to wrap that up, I would think the government should need to take a stick and carrot approach. That we just talked about the stick. The carrot would be stuff like this. I think they should make it easier for people to get things like this, because hey, guess what? What's the worst thing that could happen if somebody took one of these into a school and did a mass shooting? Okay, here's what's going to happen. There's going to be a bunch of kids taken to the hospital with contusions and maybe little broken bones and crying a lot, in a lot of pain. But they're not going to take them to the morgue, right? And so I think that's an important takeaway. So we need to be encouraging more stuff like this, more tasers, pepper spray, things that people can buy to defend themselves, and not trying to ban that kind of stuff. So having said that, I want to talk a little bit more about my thoughts on mass shootings. So I know when someone says arm the teachers, that's kind of an insane proposition, and to a certain extent. But I want to talk a little bit about that. I mean, there is certain aspects of that idea that is insane. Like, I wouldn't expect your average math teacher to need to get to carry a gun around with her in class. But I also, at the same time, cannot in good conscience support the idea of a gun-free zone, because let's face it, putting a sign on the door does nothing. Now, if you're going to have metal detectors and police officers who are armed, sure, gun-free zones work great. But if you're just going to put a sign on the door, that doesn't do anything. That's like if I go by a business and they have the gun-free zone signs on the door, you know what that tells me? It tells me they're making a political statement. It's kind of like someone going around and putting a bumper sticker on their car telling you what they believe about their politics or whatever, right? Because clearly, like anybody who legitimately has a gun permit, they're going to see that sign. They're going to go, oh, well, I respect the law and I respect these people as a private business. I'm just not going to go in there. Or at least I'm not going to go in there armed, right? But we all know that a person with hostile intentions is not going to care about that sign. And so I don't feel like that sign protects our students at all. And so I think that if there is a teacher, and I don't like to use the word teacher, I like to use the word staff. There are other people in schools besides teachers, right? So any of the staff, I don't care whether it's the lunch lady or whatever, if they want to volunteer to go through proper training and get some kind of permit to allow them to carry at school, I think that is a good idea. But I want to supplement that with saying that I kind of feel like maybe they need to have some more non-lethal options available as well, like classrooms to have tasers or stuff like this. I know it seems extreme and unnecessary. I mean, crazy to have something. Obviously, we didn't worry about that kind of thing when I was in school, but it is a legitimate concern now. I mean, you got people talking about, I just heard the other day that apparently school classrooms have to have a special bucket in their class so that if they have to go in lockdown, the kids have somewhere to go to the bathroom. So, I mean, if you're going to have ridiculous stuff like that because there is a legitimate possibility of being necessary, then maybe we should look into more non-lethal options. And sure, I mean, I don't obviously want to go up against a guy carrying an AR-15 with one of these, but if I'm locked in a room and he comes in the door or breaks in the door and that's all I've got, I'm going to use it. So it might work. I mean, it's not likely, but it's a better than zero chance. Same with a taser. If he's not wearing body armor, you might be able to tase him down. So I kind of feel like, those are options we should consider for defense against that kind of thing. And I mean, what's the worst that can happen? They always say, well, what if a student gets a hold of it? Well, I just told you what would happen. Someone's going to get hurt and whatever, but no one's going to die from it, or unlikely, unless they have a heart condition or some crazy thing like that. They're not likely to die from somebody getting a hold of something like that. So that's kind of my thoughts on it. And anyway, I guess I'm going to wrap this up. So just to kind of recap, like I said, I'm going to leave up the open carry video, but I am going to go add a pinned comment on it or whatever pointing to this video. I'm not going to attempt to take it down. I'm not going to try to hide my past involvement with Open Carry Texas. I don't want people making up their own narrative. But like I said, hopefully anyone who out there who thinks I have extreme views in one way or another now, you'll know exactly what my views are. And, I'm sure the people on the far left and the far right are probably going to hate me just as much as always. But hopefully the people who are moderate in the middle are going to see that I'm not as crazy as they thought I was. So anyway, that about wraps it up. See you next time.